This is our negotiations case study topic of choice about the 2015 nuclear deal of Iran, presented by Peter Lee, Justin Lin, Yaling Shi, and Alan Fan. So the Iran nuclear deal was an agreement reached in 2015 between the Republic of Iran and the group of world powers known as the P5+1. The P5 consisting of the United Nations Security Council, the United States, the UK, Russia, France, and China, and +1 as Germany. So based on the 2015 agreement reached, it was also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and what it was an agreement for how nuclear power was to be used. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal was a very long deal in the making. It could be traced back over 40 years ago. In 1941, there was a person named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi who rose to power, and then in 1953, with the assist of the American CIA, they overthrew the prime minister at the time, Mohammad Mossadegh. And then Shah Mohammad became the new prime minister for a long period under and with the help of the United States. In 1957, the United States and Iran signed a civilian nuclear cooperation pact, allowing the United States to help provide technical aid and quantities of enriched uranium to help Shah Mohammad to build the country's first nuclear reactor. And in 1974, with the help of the US, Shah Mohammad began to diversify Iran's energy resources and built additional nuclear reactors. However, in 1979, the Islamic Revolution finally reached its peak, and they overthrew the Shah. And then essentially the nuclear cooperation between Iran and US ended. After the 1979 revolution, Shah was replaced by Ayatollah Khomeini, who was an anti-American because of how Shah was receiving a lot of US monetary and political support throughout his 30-year reign. In 1980, there was a huge world news about what is now known as the Iran hostage crisis, where 52 Americans were held as hostages in the United States Embassy in Tehran for over a year. And as a result of that, became a turning point in hostile U.S., Iran, and global relations. Since the hostage crisis, the relationship between the United States and Iran became more and more volatile. So in the years since, under 4 different presidents, the sanctions and embargoes that were put upon Iran never seemed to improve relations. During Reagan's presidency and also the time of the Iraq-Iran War, his administration imposed several trade and economic sanctions against Iran, and were preparing to even side and help with the Iraq army. However, in the end of the war, the United States warship, the USS Vincennes, accidentally shot down the Iranian Airbus A300, killing over 299 civilians on board. In George H.W. Bush's presidency, Bush Sr., he, however, wanted to rekindle the relationship between the Americans and Iranians. However, once again, in Bill Clinton's presidency, his administration, however, imposed further sanctions and embargoes towards Iran, and resulted in a trade death, and at the same time The American Congress also imposed further sanctions prohibiting American and global companies from investing and doing business in Iran. Additionally, they also objected Iran's request for financial aid from the World Bank. And George Bush Jr.'s presidency, he was very open and vocal about his concerns for Iran as a nuclear power in terms of how they were using nuclear to potentially be weaponizing their own arsenal. And at the same time, also vocally encouraged other great nations to help join in and to ensure that the International Atomic Energy Association was monitoring the nuclear activities of each other. In the 2000s, the United States decided to go to war with Iraq because they discovered that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And at the same time, the United Nations discovered through whistleblowers that Iran had this Natanz facility that was capable of enriching uranium. And so the United Nations sent inspectors into the Natanz facilities. And at that time, after the report came out, the Iran nuclear program became suspended. Following additional reports to the UN, France, UK, and Germany requested to inspect the Natanz facility and reached a earlier short agreement with Iran to suspend production of uranium, unless for research and development purposes. Additionally, the International Atomic Energy Agency accused Iran of not being compliant with international safeguards. However, through the UN's inspections of the facilities, they could not find any evidence of an attempt to use nuclear enriched energy to build a bomb. Fast forward to 2012, Iran publicly announced that they've created 3,000 new advanced centrifuges for enriching uranium in the Natanz plant. And immediately, the 6 countries of United States, Russia, China, France, Germany, and the UK indicated to Iran that they should freeze their creation of uranium because of the concentrations were being too high and that it could be potentially used for creating bombs. However, in the viewpoint of Iran, they wanted to make nuclear as a process to increase their country's economics because of the sanctions imposed by Western countries from before. This was not acceptable. So in this case, the Western countries decided to stop oil purchases from Iran and causing Iran to suffer more trade-wise. Additionally, the US and the European Union imposed more severe trade sanctions against the large industries of Iran and the finance industry. And by the end of 2012, the Iranian currency lost half of its value. And as a result, Iran was even more angered and arranged for new centrifuges to create more uranium. By 2013, they openly announced that there were 16 new nuclear stations in Iran and that uranium reserves were through the roof, and that they were not deciding to make nuclear weapons. However, should they decide to, there was no global power that could eventually stop them. At the end of 2013, diplomats from Iran and the 6 world powers, P5+1, agreed to start an interim process towards reaching a deal regarding how to control Iran's nuclear program. At first, they decided that the deal should slow down Iran's production and so limit the risk of them building nuclear weapons. So the P5+1 started negotiating with Iran on proposals based on a previous package. And the newly elected president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, offered to be more transparent when maintaining their growing nuclear program. In return, the international sanctions placed on Iran's economy were to be removed. However, it was very hard to reach this kind of agreement. And so in the end of 2013, President Barack Obama directly contacted Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, which was the first time this high level of contact had been obtained since 1971, and openly addressed that there are significant obstacles, but that these agreements can be accomplished. Moving from this significant shift from distrust and suspicion, the Iranian nuclear deal was finally taking form. And in 2014, more meetings took place to reach synergistic alignment on the agreement, and especially how compliance would be followed by both participating parties, particularly Iran and the P5+1. Eventually, in 2015, a preliminary framework was reached between Iran and the P5+1. What that entailed was that Iran would redesign and reduce their nuclear reserves, and also reduce the amount of facilities operational, and accept protocols for safeguarding and transparency as set by the International Atomic Energy Agency's agreements, in order to help lift all economic sanctions from Iran and freeing up their economy to more opportunities for generating other sources of energy related income, such as oil and their vast finance industry. So considering that Iran has been isolated for over 4 decades, this nuclear deal would be a new chapter in globalization and relationships between Iran and the rest of the world, particularly with the US. So, in summary, what the P5+1 side of the agreement, what they agreed to was that the European Union would remove all energy and banking industry related sanctions upon Iran, that the United States would remove all sanctions against companies doing business in and with Iran, and the United Nations would remove sanctions with Iran, and that the International Atomic Energy Agency would be able to audit the nuclear facilities of Iran, and if these audits were to be failed, that all sanctions from previous would be reinstated automatically. However, on the other side, what Iran agreed to was that they'd reduce the stockpile of uranium from over 10,000 kilograms to 300 kilograms for the next 15 years, that their uranium enrichment purity levels would be capped maximum at 3.67%, which is the amount that's suitable only for civilian nuclear power generation use. The amount of nuclear centrifuges that existed would be reduced by 2/3, from 19,000 to usable of 6,100, and that Iran would convert their nuclear uranium enrichment centers into technology and R&D centers, that they would redesign the nuclear reactors located in Iraq to limit the potential that they would produce weapons-grade uranium, that they have to agree to transparency and allow for inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and that they would be included in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We observed 5 types of negotiation styles over our research. It was that competing and avoiding seemed to be what led up to all the tension. During all the tension buildup was this was the kind of negotiation that was occurring in preemptive of the 2013 discussions and preemptive of 2014. However, in 2014 and 2015, the factors of and styles of accommodation, compromise, and collaborating was ultimately what allowed the P5+1 and Iran to reach an agreement that Iran wants the sanctions to be lifted, and that the P5+1 were willing to accommodate for that on the same terms that they want Iran to reduce the amount of uranium that's being produced that could be potentially used in producing nuclear weapons. The strategy for Iran was that to enhance Iran's international position. They threatened to quit the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with nuclear technology development capability. They would be one of the more powerful countries. And so they threatened to quit the agreement and continue to develop nuclear technology and potentially have the right to choose if they wanted to weaponize. And this position gave them power in terms of providing terror, and that nuclear technology put them at the level of the other countries that held nuclear weaponized technology, and that this is a strategy used in Asian cultures where they're more collective, and if they're not able to benefit, then others are not able to benefit either. On the side of the US and P5+1, their goal is to stop Iran from developing nuclear for the potential of them creating nuclear weapons, and to also maintain their international position as the UN as Security Council seat members, and to reduce any future security risk. And so they'd execute punishment to Iran by hacking out sanctions and involve international opinions. And so their position is also one of terror for the purpose of balance, and to use their strong economic international position to block Iran from their activities. So our recommendations is that the team, USA was a major player since decades ago. And so they were dealt with the upper hand, and there's some things that we would do differently if we were the chief negotiator, was that we'd show more empathy and converse with their thoughts with Iran's chief negotiator early on, way before the 2013 negotiations, and try to be more sympathetic with Iran's point of view in terms of culture, and that focus on building more trust between both sides, and because new leadership has new leadership viewpoints, and we're facing different times, and that and use the accommodating strategy while also making obvious our absolute bottom line, and but more early on than leading it out to 2013. And that we would show more goodwill towards Iran to reduce future friction, so the time required to teach the zone of possible agreement can be shortened. And then we could also increase the probability of acceptance. And our recommendation for Iran would give the strenuous situation that Iran was in, that we would do differently as chief negotiator, that we would focus on clarifying Iran's position and objective on this deal, be transparent to reestablish trust, rather than bluffing during the negotiation process, that we would instead look for a way to understand mutual values early on. There's no really hard or soft power. It's that trust, as a result of many factors over history, that the prime minister has broken trust in the past, and so it was hard from a global powers view on Iran that Iran could be trustworthy, and that we must find a way to agree on points earlier on, and same for U.S., because U.S. did help Yemen, Syria, and Iraq in the 70s, who was not exactly a friend of Iran. So that's our project, and thank you very much.